Daniel Carter woke up to the sound of the mining drills deep beneath the earth, and for him, it was a sound he had grown used to for years. The same low rumble that shook the walls of the small colony on this lonely world. At the edge of space, he stretched his arms and rubbed the sleep from his eyes, then stepped outside into the dusty morning light. The colony was simple. A few buildings scattered on the barren ground surrounded by the endless desert of stone and ash. But for Daniel, this was home. He had worked here as an engineer, repairing machines, keeping the drills alive, and making sure the colony never fell apart. Laura Price was already outside, standing near the old communications tower, her hands moving quickly as she checked. The cables her face showed the same quiet determination she always carried. She had once dreamed of working on big stations in the core, but fate had brought her here far from everything. Still, she smiled at Daniel when she saw him and waved Ethan. Brooks, a young miner with dust on his clothes, joined them, grinning as always. He was younger than both Daniel and Laura, full of energy and wild ideas, often speaking about leaving this world for adventure in the stars. Daniel often laughed at him, but secretly admired his spirit. The colony lived in silence, broken only by machines and the talk of workers. People mined the rocks, hoping to find enough resources to trade for supplies. It was not easy life, but it was safe until that night when the sky turned to fire. Daniel was in the workshop repairing a power relay when the alarm sounded. He rushed outside and saw lights streaking across the heavens, fiery trails burning into the atmosphere. At first he thought it might be meteors, but the shapes grew larger, and soon he saw the cold outline of ships, massive alien ships descending with menace. The colony had no defense, no fleet, no weapons, only drills and weak walls. Panic spread as the colonists screamed. Children cried and families clutched each other while the shadows of alien raiders covered the ground. The first explosion shattered the silence. Structures collapsed in dust and fire. Aliens poured out of landing craft. Tall, armored figures with cruel eyes, they carried strange weapons that flashed with energy. Colonists tried to hide, but the raiders dragged them out into the open. Daniel pulled Laura behind him, shielding her as Ethan shouted for people to run, but there was nowhere to run. They were trapped in the middle of the desert with monsters that had come to take everything. Vorakesh, the alien commander, walked slowly among them, his voice cold as he mocked the weak humans. He said no one would come to help them, that humanity had abandoned the outer colonies. Long ago, his soldiers laughed and began looting supplies, tearing through storage and forcing colonists to kneel. Daniel felt anger burning inside him, but he knew they had no power to fight back. Laura clutched his arm, whispering that the communications tower still worked if they could send a signal. Maybe, just maybe, someone would hear them. Ethan caught the idea, and together they moved quietly toward the tower, avoiding the eyes of the guards. Daniel kept his head low and led the way, his heart pounding with every step. Laura began working on the transmitter, her fingers shaking as she connected wires and powered up the old system. The tower hummed weakly like a dying heartbeat. She pressed the button and began sending an SOS, her voice steady though her eyes were filled with fear. She said the colony was under attack, that lives were in danger and they needed help. The signal echoed out into the void. The aliens saw the tower light flicker and laughed. They jeered that no human fleet would ever come. They had ruled these regions unchallenged for years. Daniel watched them mock, and he clenched his fists, wishing he had the strength to fight, but all he could do was stand by Laura and Ethan and hope the signal reached someone far. Away above the colony, Vorakesh raised his arms to the stars, declaring that the humans would kneel or die. The colonists trembled as soldiers fired into the air to remind them of their helplessness. Daniel held Laura close, whispering that the message was out there, and somewhere in the endless darkness someone might still be listening. And though fear weighed heavy on them all, a spark of hope had been lit. Vorakesh stood tall on the command platform of his flagship, watching the colony below burn with small fires and broken buildings. His mouth curled into a cruel smile as his soldiers dragged more humans into the open. The screams of fear pleased him. He enjoyed the sight of powerless creatures bowing before strength to him. Humans were weak, scattered across the stars, and without unity, their colonies were ripe for plunder. He laughed as one of his captains asked if the distress beacon should be destroyed. He waved his hand lazily and said, Let them scream. No one will come to answer them. No fleet will dare this deep into our reach. His crew laughed with him, believing his words, on the surface. Daniel held Laura close as they crouched behind the base of the old communications tower. The air smelled of smoke and ash. Ethan knelt beside them, his fists clenched. He wanted to run at the aliens with nothing but a mining pick. But Daniel stopped him, whispering that rushing would mean death. They had to wait for the right moment. Laura adjusted the transmitter once more, her voice soft but steady. As she repeated the signal over and over, she begged for anyone who could hear them to respond. The device sparked and shook, but it kept working. The hum of the tower was their last hope. Daniel could see the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the fire of determination. The aliens mocked the colonists, forcing families to kneel in the dirt. Vorakesh walked among them, pointing out the young and the strong. His soldiers grabbed those he chose, dragging them toward the landing craft. Daniel could see the faces of his neighbors filled with despair. Many believed no help would ever come, and that this was the end. Ethan whispered angrily that humanity could not have forgotten them, that somewhere someone had to care. Daniel nodded, but inside he wondered if they truly had been left alone in this far corner of space. Laura held the transmitter tighter, refusing to stop sending the call. She said even if no one came, they had to keep trying because it was better to die, knowing they had not given up far away beyond the sight of the raiders. The signal traveled across the stars. It slipped through old hidden relays built long ago when humanity prepared for dangers that most had forgotten. The signal passed into a quiet station orbiting a frozen moon, a place where machines waited in silence. Suddenly the machines awoke, red lights flashing as the SOS repeated again and again deep. Inside the hidden station, the message was sent forward toward Earth. It pierced through layers of silence and reached the command heart of humanity. At Earth Fleet Command, Admiral Jason Cole stood in a dimly lit chamber when the alarm sounded. The technicians rushed to their stations, reporting the incoming distress signal. His eyes narrowed as he read the words, "Humanity's outer colony under attack by alien fleet, coordinates attached." His heart grew heavy because he knew what this meant. For years they had avoided war. For years the galaxy thought humans had gone quiet, but Jason knew the fleet had never been broken, only hidden, waiting for the time when it would be needed again. He pressed his hand against the command console and gave the order to alert the fleet. In hangars across Earth and hidden stations, warships that had slept for decades came alive. Engines roared like thunder, soldiers hurried to their posts, and officers barked commands. The mighty warship Invictus prepared to lead the charge, its hull shining under the light as crew boarded quickly. Among them was Claire Morgan, tactical officer with sharp eyes and a calm voice. She moved through the bridge, checking every system. Samuel Hayes, commander of the Marine units, tightened his armor and gave orders to his soldiers. Their mission was clear: respond to the distress call, protect the colony, and remind the galaxy of humanity's strength. Admiral Jason watched from the main deck as ships aligned for jump. He remembered the stories of the old wars, and he knew the galaxy had grown careless. Thinking humans were soft now, he would prove them wrong. He gave the final command, and the Invictus and its fleet leapt into jump space, disappearing into the dark, leaving only silence behind them. Back on the colony, the people endured more cruelty. Vorakesh ordered executions to break their spirit. Soldiers dragged 2 miners into the open and struck them down as a warning. Children cried and parents begged for mercy. Daniel gritted his teeth, holding Ethan back from rushing forward. Laura's face turned pale, but she kept whispering that someone had heard them. She refused to believe otherwise. Daniel whispered back that she might be right, but even he could not silence the fear rising in his chest as he watched the aliens gloat above them. The only comfort he carried was the thought that somewhere far away, machines had stirred, and a fleet had awakened. And if fate was with them, the message might bring salvation. Admiral Jason Cole stood on the bridge of the Invictus, his eyes fixed on the stars stretched before him. The hum of the engines filled the deck, and the crew moved with practiced speed around him. The distress signal from the colony still echoed. In his mind, he knew the people there were terrified and clinging to hope. With every passing second, their lives were in danger, and he could not let them fall. He gave a steady command for the fleet to hold formation and prepare for combat drills, his voice calm but carrying the weight of certainty. The crew trusted him and his presence gave them strength. Claire Morgan checked the tactical displays, her fingers gliding over the console. She tracked the readings of the alien fleet reported in the distress call and began running possible strategies. Her mind worked quickly, calculating where the enemy would position ships and how best to strike. She turned to Jason and assured him that once they arrived, she would cut through the raiders. Before they had time to react, Jason nodded his approval and told her to prepare strike packages. He wanted precision, not chaos. Samuel Hayes walked the deck behind the Marines, giving short commands. His soldiers adjusted armor, checked weapons, and secured gear. The Marines were restless, eager for action. Some were nervous, but Samuel's calm manner kept them steady. He told them the colony was counting on them and that they would not fail. Across the fleet, preparations continued. Engineers worked in the engine bays, tightening bolts and running diagnostics. Pilots sealed their helmets and climbed into fighters. Their craft lined up on launch rails, waiting for the command to strike. The Invictus was the pride of the fleet, massive and armed. With weapons the galaxy had long forgotten, railguns that could tear through capital ships and plasma cannons that could vaporize armor in seconds. But it was not just the weapons. It was the spirit of the crew that made it deadly. They had trained for years in silence, waiting for this moment when humanity would rise again. Jason stood before the large star map, watching as the fleet prepared for the jump window. The coordinates of the colony glowed in red, a reminder of the urgency. His second officer asked if they should wait for reinforcements, but Jason shook his head. Reinforcements would take too long, and by then the colony might be ash. His decision was final. They would go now with the ships they had, and they would finish the enemy. Before the enemy finished the colonists, he gave the command and the engines flared as the fleet surged into jump space. The stars stretched into lines and then into darkness. The crew held their breath as space folded around them. Inside the jump corridors, the silence was heavy. Only the thrum of the engines broke it. Jason walked slowly along the deck, pausing to look at his officers. Each one nodded to him with determination. Claire's eyes never left the tactical board while Samuel gave the Marines one last speech, telling them that history was watching them, and that when they landed on the colony, the people would see humanity's shield standing strong again. He reminded them that no Marine fights alone, and that they would bring every last colonist home. His words lit a fire in the hearts of his soldiers, and the Marines pounded their fists against their armor in unity. Back on the colony, Daniel, Laura, and Ethan huddled together as night fell. Smoke rose in the distance where buildings had burned. The aliens forced people to work, dragging heavy crates of stolen supplies to the landing craft. Daniel's body ached from exhaustion, but he refused to close his eyes. He kept watching the sky, hoping for something, anything. Laura stayed near the transmitter, whispering into it every few minutes, her voice raw from calling for help. Ethan's anger grew each hour. He swore that if no one came, he would charge at the aliens himself. Daniel reminded him that dying without reason would help no one. Ethan knew it was true, but his young heart raged against the hopelessness still. He stayed with them because he trusted Daniel. And Laura Vorakesh sat in his command throne on the alien flagship, confident in victory. He ordered his soldiers to prepare the colony for full harvest by dawn. He wanted everything stripped and the humans left broken. He told his lieutenants that the distress signal was nothing but noise. No fleet would dare step into his territory. Did not know that at that very moment the darkness of space was bending as human warships raced toward the colony faster than light. A storm carried on steel and fire. As the Invictus neared the exit point, Claire reported growing energy spikes. The jump would end soon. Jason stood tall and gave the order for battle readiness. The alarm sounded across the ship. Red lights flashing. Crew locked into their stations. Marines sealed their helmets and fighters powered weapons. Jason spoke across the fleet channel. His voice calm but fierce, he told them they were the line between life and death for the colonists, and that today they would remind the galaxy that humanity protects its own. There was no cheering, only silence as the crews absorbed his words. Then one by one voices responded with steady affirmations. They were ready. The stars snapped back into view as the fleet exited jump space. The colony appeared before them. Scarred and burning alien ships hung in orbit, their weapons flashing against the ground, but they froze in place as massive human signatures erupted across their sensors for a heartbeat. The sky was quiet. Then Claire gave the order, and the Invictus opened fire. Railguns. Thundered plasma lances cut the void. The first alien cruiser exploded into shards of fire lighting the sky. The battle for the colony had begun and hope at last returned. The next morning began with a strange silence across the camp, and every soldier felt it in his chest like a weight that would not lift because the night before had left them shaken but not broken, and now everyone waited for orders that had not yet come, and they kept looking at the human officer as if he carried all the answers, though he himself knew the dangers were not ending but only beginning, because the enemy was preparing something darker, something no one wanted to face, but everyone knew was coming. And as the first sun ray touched the war-torn field, the Death Worlder stood up, his uniform, dusty, his eyes sharp and his expression calm, in a way that gave strength to all who looked at him. For in that silence he walked through the camp and each soldier sat straighter as if his presence alone pushed away fear. But deep inside his mind he was fighting his own storm because he knew what it meant when the battlefield became too quiet. It meant the enemy was changing their plan, and silence was the tool they always used before destruction. He stepped into the command tent where alien generals argued in low whispers, their maps spread wide across the table with glowing red lines marking the paths of destruction already taken, and one alien elder with scales of silver pointed his claw at the map and said, "They will come from the east. No doubt they will attack the weaker flank and break our shield from within." But another argued, shaking his head and saying, "No, they will not risk the east. They know the Death Worlder guards that side and none would dare to face his unit directly." But the Death Worlder himself only stood still watching them with quiet patience, until finally he spoke in his simple tone that cut through the noise like a blade. He said, "They will strike both east and west at once because they do not fear losing soldiers. They fear losing time. And to them, time is more important than life." The aliens froze, their whispers cut short, and silence spread, again because they all knew he was right. Yet none of them wanted to believe it. Then the council sent a messenger with news that shook every ear. The enemy had unleashed a weapon, not seen before. A weapon that could tear through cities in minutes, and erase armies without leaving bodies behind. It was not fire. It was not steel. It was sound waves that destroyed nerve and thought, leaving only emptiness. And when the messenger finished, his voice trembled, and he asked, "What can we do against this?" And none of the alien leaders had an answer. But the Death Worlder only narrowed his eyes, for he had seen sound used as a weapon before on Earth. Though not like this, but he knew one truth, that all sound needed air to travel. And he said one thing in his slow, calm voice. He said, "Take away their air and their sound dies." The aliens blinked, confused for a moment, until they realized what he meant, and one of them gasped, saying, "You would burn the skies themselves." But the Death Worlder only replied, "If that is what it takes, then yes." As night fell again, the camp came alive with preparation, not of ordinary weapons, but of strange machines the humans had brought with them, machines that could churn the air and turn storms against enemies. And the aliens looked at them in awe and fear, because the technology looked crude but deadly, each bolt and wire shining under moonlight as if it carried thunder itself. And the Death Worlder walked among them, adjusting parts with his rough hands, muttering instructions that no alien could understand. Yet they followed anyway, because they knew this human-built weapons not just with mind, but with instinct, and that instinct had saved them many times before. And as the machines hummed louder, the air grew heavy as if the planet itself knew what was about to happen. But not everyone trusted the Death Worlder, because within the council, there were whispers of betrayal. Some aliens said no species could be so fearless without hiding something darker. They wondered if the human had his own secret alliance with the enemy, and if he was leading them into traps. And though no proof existed, suspicion grew like poison. And one young alien officer decided to act on his doubt, sneaking into the camp at night to sabotage the storm machines, thinking he would save his people from human lies. But as his claw touched the wires, the Death Worlder's hand caught his wrist like steel, and in the moonlight, the human's eyes burned, not with anger, but with deep sadness, as he said, "You think I fight for myself? No, I fight for all of you, even when you do not trust me." And the young alien froze, ashamed and trembling, until the Death Worlder released him, saying, "Go tell your council that trust is a blade either sharp or broken. Morning came with thunder, but not of nature. It was the machines roaring to life, clouds gathering unnaturally fast above the battlefield, lightning streaking across the horizon, and the soldiers below watched with open mouths as the sky itself bent to human will. And then came the enemy endless lines of armored beasts moving across the ground, their sound weapon humming like a storm ready to swallow life itself. But before they could release their wave, the human gave one signal and the machines unleashed their fury. The sky screamed, lightning crashed, winds howled, tearing through the enemy lines, and the sound weapon faltered, twisted, and then collapsed upon its own army, burning them with the force of their own wave. The battlefield shook. Mountains groaned, and the alien soldiers cheered, their voices rising above the chaos as hope returned stronger than ever. But the Death Worlder did not cheer, for he saw beyond the victory. He saw the enemy retreating, in order, not in chaos, which meant they had not yet played their final hand. The smoke cleared the council, gathered once more celebrating, but the Death Worlder remained apart. His eyes fixed on the horizon, his thoughts heavy, because he had learned something in the storm. Not from the machines, not from the battle, but from the way the enemy retreated, for in their formation, he recognized patterns not random but designed as if they wanted him to see. And in that moment he realized they were testing him, they were watching how he fought, how he thought, and they were planning something that was not war but a hunt. And he knew then that the real battle was still ahead, and it would not be fought with weapons of fire or storm, but with something far more dangerous. The night after the battle was quiet again, too quiet for a land that had just seen fire and storm, and the Death Worlder could not sleep, his instincts screaming louder than thunder. And so he walked alone beyond the camp into the ruins of a fallen city, its buildings shattered, its streets broken, and there he felt eyes watching from the shadows, not enemy, not friend, but something else. And from the darkness stepped a figure cloaked in black, its face hidden, its voice soft, yet sharp as it said, "You fight well, Death Worlder, but you fight for the wrong side." And the human froze, his hand near his weapon, but his eyes steady as he asked, "Who are you?" And the figure replied, "I am the one who knows what your council hides from you, and I am the one who can tell you why this war will never end, because they do not want it to end." And with those words, the ground beneath them cracked with echoes of explosions from far away, and the city itself groaned as if the enemy had struck again. And the Death Worlder realized his worst fear was true. The war was not about survival, it was about control, and someone wanted to make sure humanity never discovered the truth. The explosions in the distance carried across the ruins like rolling thunder, and the Death Worlder stood facing the cloaked figure, his body tense, his eyes steady, and though the stranger had spoken softly, his words struck deeper than any blade, because the human had long suspected the council was hiding something, and now the voice before him confirmed it without hesitation. But trust was a dangerous thing on a battlefield, and he did not lower his guard as he asked again, "Who are you? And why do you follow me through war?" And the cloaked figure stepped closer, shadows covering every feature, and said, "I am no enemy of yours. I am no friend of theirs either. I am only one who has seen the game they play with your people and with mine." The Death Worlder's mind raced, for he had heard whispers before about hidden hands behind the council, but none dared to speak them aloud. And now, here stood one who spoke as if he had walked among secrets themselves, and the human replied, "Speak plain. If you know something, then tell me, for I have no time for riddles." And the figure let out a faint laugh, bitter and heavy, saying, "You humans always ask for truth without fearing its cost, and perhaps that is why they fear you so much, because you are not like the others. You will not bow to lies." The Death Worlder's hand tightened on his weapon, but he did not strike because he sensed the truth in the voice, and he said then, "Tell me why this war does not end." The figure turned his head toward the sky where smoke and ash painted the stars and whispered, "Because the war is the council's weapon, not the enemy." The words sank like ice in the human's chest, and he felt the weight of them pressing hard against his resolve, because he knew, if that were true, then all the lives lost, all the blood spilled, were part of something darker than survival. And he asked, "What do you mean?" And the cloaked one stepped closer, saying, "The council feeds on fear. They unite species not by hope, but by terror of a common enemy. They need war because war makes them powerful, And so they keep the fire burning, never letting it die. No matter how many lives are turned to ash. The Death Worlder stared silent for a long moment, before replying, "If that is true, then the enemy is not the one we fight outside. It is the one that sits inside our own council chamber." The cloaked figure nodded slowly and said, "You see clearer than most, Death Worlder, but clarity will make you dangerous, and soon they will turn their blades toward you." Before the human could reply, another explosion shook the ground closer this time, and both turned toward the sound. But when he looked back, the cloaked figure was gone, vanished into smoke as if never there. Only the echo of his words remained, and the Death Worlder clenched his jaw, because he knew he could not ignore them even if they were poison. For deep down he had already seen signs of truth in the way the council acted in whispers and shadows. He returned to camp before dawn, his face harder than stone, and the soldiers around him sensed the change. Though none asked for, they knew the human carried burdens too heavy to share. But in the command tent, the council celebrated the storm victory with false smiles and hollow cheers, their voices high with talk of glory, yet their eyes shifting whenever the Death Worlder entered, as if they feared his silence more than the enemy's fire. He stood among them, saying little, only listening as they planned. The next march, pushing soldiers toward another battle without rest or reason. And finally he spoke with a calm voice that froze the chamber. He said, "If we keep moving without pause, we are not leading our armies. We are feeding them to slaughter." Chamber went still, alien eyes narrowing, claws twitching, wings folding, and one council elder hissed, saying, "You speak out of turn, human. You are not here to question our command." And the Death Worlder stepped closer until his shadow fell across the table, his voice low but sharp, saying, "Then why am I here? Am I only your weapon, your storm machine, your beast of war? Or am I here to save lives? You choose, because I will not lead soldiers into death for nothing." The silence cut deep until finally, another elder, softer in tone, said, "Enough, we will rest the armies 2 days, then move again," and the others nodded. Though anger flickered in their gaze, and the Death Worlder knew they agreed, not because of wisdom, but because they feared what he might do if ignored. During those 2 days, the camp grew restless, soldiers whispering about betrayal, about spies, about the strange retreat of the enemy. And through it all, the Death Worlder walked among them, steady as stone, never showing the storm inside, but always watching, always listening, until one night a scream shattered the stillness and soldiers rushed toward the prison tent, where an enemy captive had been kept. And there they found him dead, not by blade, not by fire, but by poison slipped, quietly, and in his hand a scrap of cloth. Not his own, marked with the council's crest. The soldiers looked to their leaders for answers, but the leaders had none. Only excuses. And in that moment, whispers grew louder, that perhaps the human was right. Perhaps the true enemy was not outside the walls but inside. The Death Worlder stood over the body, his face unreadable but his voice carrying through the camp as he said, "War is not fought only with steel. It is fought with truth and lies, and if lies command us, then we are already defeated." The words spread like fire, and soldiers from many species began to look at him not just as warrior but as leader, a dangerous shift that the council did not miss. For their eyes followed him with growing suspicion and fear. On the third night, the Death Worlder sat alone, sharpening his blade, when a young alien soldier approached nervously, holding a sealed note, and said, "A message came for you from no one I can name." The human took it, opening carefully, and inside he read words written in hurried strokes. "Tonight they will silence you. Leave before dawn." His eyes narrowed, but his face stayed calm as he folded the note, slipping it into his jacket, and he looked at the soldier, saying, "Tell no one you gave me this," and the alien nodded quickly before vanishing into the shadows. The Death Worlder rose before dawn, walking silently out of camp as if on patrol, but he did not move far, only enough to watch from the ruins nearby, and as the first light touched the camp, he saw movement in the council tent. Cloaked figures entering, quiet and swift, blades flashing in the dim glow, and he realized the note had spoken truth. They had come to end him before he grew too strong. He gripped his weapon, ready to strike, but then he stopped, his mind sharper than steel. For he knew if he returned now with blood on his hands, they would call him traitor. They would twist truth into lie and turn soldiers against him. No, he could not fight them here. Not yet. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the horizon where the enemy had retreated days before, and he whispered to himself, "If the council fears truth, Then I will find it where they hide it, and I will bring it back like fire and let it burn their lies away." And with that he vanished into the ruins, moving toward the unknown, leaving behind a camp that would soon wake to rumors of his disappearance. Some would call it desertion, some would call it betrayal, but those who had seen the storm in his eyes would call it something else, a hunt for truth. The days that followed were long and heavy as he crossed broken lands alone, his supplies thin, his body worn, but his mind unshaken. For each night he remembered the cloaked figure's words, and each morning he felt the weight of soldiers who still believed in him, and he knew he could not fail them. Not now. Not ever. And finally, after many days, he reached the edge of enemy territory where strange towers rose against the sky. Not made of stone, not made of metal, but something alive, twisting and pulsing like veins of a giant beast, and he watched from the shadows, heart-steady, breath slow, as alien guards moved around the towers, their movements too precise, too rehearsed, and he realized with a sharp twist of dread these were not soldiers, they were slaves bound by something unseen. He waited until night before slipping inside, moving silent as shadow, and what he found froze him in place. Inside the tower was no weapon, no army, but rows upon rows of machines humming softly, and within them were not enemies but prisoners, species from across the galaxy. Their minds shackled, their bodies asleep as if dreaming, yet alive, connected to wires that pulsed with energy, and the Death Worlder's jaw clenched because he understood now the war was not about land or power, it was about control, and these prisoners were the fuel of it, their fear, their pain, their very thoughts feeding the Council's fire. And when he stepped closer, he saw something that struck him harder than any blade. Among the prisoners were humans, not many, but enough to show that Earth itself was already entangled in this web. His hands shook, but not with fear, with fury, and he whispered, "I see now. I see it all, and I will not let this stand." And as he turned to leave, he felt again the presence of eyes in the shadows, and there stood the cloaked figure once more, saying, "You have found it, Death Worlder. Now you know the truth. But truth alone is not enough. You must carry it back and survive the fire they will send after you, for once you return with proof, the Council will fall, or the galaxy will burn." The Death Worlder stared into the shadows, his resolve turning to steel, and he replied, "Then let them burn, for I will not stop until the lies end." And with those words he vanished into the night, carrying the weight of truth heavier than any weapon, for he knew the next battle would not be on the field of war, but in the heart of every soldier who had ever fought under a banner of lies. The Death Worlder moved through the ruins with the weight of truth pressing down heavier than any weapon he had ever carried, and though his body ached and his supplies were thin, he did not slow, because he knew what waited behind him was not just an army of enemies but the poisoned hand of the Council itself. He had seen what they tried to bury deep. He had seen the towers where prisoners slept, their minds shackled, their pain harvested like fuel for endless wars. And he had seen humans among them, which meant the claws of this lie already reached Earth, and that thought alone kept his feet moving through the dust and ash of the wasted lands. He told himself, again and again, "I must carry this back. I must show them. I must not fall." He traveled, by night moving silent between shadows and broken stone, because enemy patrols watched the roads and the skies above. Sometimes he heard their machines hum in the distance, their lights sweeping over the dark ground, and he would press flat into the dirt, holding his breath until they passed. Sometimes he fought with hunger and thirst worse than any blade cutting through him, but he kept his mind sharp, for he knew that weakness was the weapon of those who wanted him to fail. One night, as he crossed a valley of shattered metal, he stopped because he heard a sound not of machines but of footsteps behind him, steady and quiet, too skilled to be accident. He turned with weapon raised, and there once more stood the cloaked figure who had haunted him since the battlefield. The voice came calm as before, saying, "You move fast, but not fast enough for what hunts you now." The Death Worlder did not lower his guard and asked again, "Who are you truly? Why do you follow me, and why not strike if you serve them?" The figure shook his head and said, "I told you before, I serve no one, I follow, because your path is the only one that may break this chain of lies, and I have seen enough wars to know that without proof, you will be called traitor, not savior." The human narrowed his eyes but asked, "What do you want from me?" And the cloaked figure replied, "Nothing but to see the end of what they built, for I, too, lost everything to this false war. My people were broken not by the enemy, but by the council itself. They fed us into fire, then abandoned us when we were no longer useful. I escaped, and since that day I swore I would never again let them hide behind their lies." The Death Worlder studied him in silence before finally lowering his weapon slightly, not in trust but in recognition of the pain behind those words. They moved together for days through wastelands and ruins, always careful, always silent, sometimes speaking little, sometimes exchanging fragments of pasts. The human told of his home world, of storms and oceans and forests that hardened his people, and the cloaked one listened with quiet wonder before saying, "Perhaps that is why they fear you, because no world has ever made creatures like yours who fight storms daily and call it life." At last the horizon showed the faint glimmer of the Allied camp lights in the far distance, and the Death Worlder felt the pull of duty stronger than ever. He turned to the cloaked one and said, "This is where we part. I must walk into that camp alone, or they will see you as shadow and enemy." The figure nodded and said, "Then walk with care, for once you reveal truth, they will not embrace you. They will bare their teeth, but remember, this fear can silence one man, but it cannot silence many. If you show them proof, they will listen, even if their leaders do not." The Death Worlder gave one last nod before walking down toward the lights, while the cloaked figure faded into the dark. When he entered the camp, whispers spread quickly. Soldiers turned their heads, eyes wide, for many thought him dead, others thought him traitor. And now here he stood alive, carrying a weight in his gaze that silenced them more than his presence ever had. He walked straight to the command tent where the council gathered, their faces twisting with surprise and hidden anger. One elder spoke first, saying, "We thought you lost in the retreat. What trick do you play now?" "Human." The Death Worlder did not answer with words at first. Instead, he placed upon the table a small shard of metal taken from the towers and a recording device stolen from the machines. He looked each of them in the eye and said, "This is your war. This is what you hide." He activated the device, and the room, filled with sounds and images, rose. Of prisoners wired into living machines, their pain drained their minds, caged, and among them human faces, pale and still. The soldiers outside heard the noise and gathered at the entrance until soon the tent was crowded with watchers. The council tried to cut the device off, but the Death Worlder slammed his hand against the table, his voice like thunder, saying, "You will not silence this again. The truth is here. The war is a lie. You feed us into fire, so you can rule with fear." The soldiers erupted, in anger, some shouting, some crying out, while the council scrambled to regain control. One elder screamed, "Lies, this is fabricated. He seeks to divide us." But another soldier shouted back, "I have seen such towers in the east. I thought them enemy prisons. But now I know the truth." And more voices rose until the camp trembled with unrest. The Death Worlder raised his voice again, steady and hard, saying, "You must decide now. Will you follow leaders who treat you as cattle, or will you stand as free people against both enemy and traitor?" The moment burned heavy with tension until finally a young alien soldier stepped forward, raising his weapon not against the human, but against the council, his voice shaking yet clear, saying, "I will not die for lies." Others followed until the tent filled with weapons aimed at the very leaders who had commanded them for so long. The elders hissed and shouted threats, but their power was gone, stripped by truth in the open, and the Death Worlder said, "Take them, bind. Then we will decide their fate when the war is ours again." The council was dragged away screaming but powerless, and the camp became something new. No longer an army fed by fear, but a gathering bound by fury and hope. And in that fire, the Death Worlder stood not as stranger, not as beast, but as leader. Many turned to him with eyes of trust, asking, "What now?" And he answered with words plain and strong, "We march not to serve the council, but to free the prisoners. We march not to destroy for their glory, but to end the fire once and for all. If humans must stand first, then so be it. But know this, we will not stop until the lies are ashes." The march began the next day, slower, heavier, but filled with purpose. Soldiers from many species walked side by side, no longer as pawns, but as fighters of truth. And with each mile more joined deserters, survivors, wanderers who heard whispers of the Death Worlder who carried fire in his heart. Soon the force grew larger than any council army and the enemy. began to notice patrols attacked but were broken quickly. Their slaves freed, their machines destroyed, and still the march continued. The Dravak War Council watched with unease, once mocking, now cautious, for they too had fed on fear. But now the fear was shifting, turning not against humans alone, but against all who ruled with lies. Their commander slammed his fist upon the table, growling, "These apes are fire itself. They spread faster than we can crush them." And another whispered, "Then perhaps the stories were true, that their world makes monsters who cannot be tamed." The commander spat back, "Then we will burn their world too." But even he felt doubt creep into his voice. At last the march reached the edge of the great towers, the heart of the enemy's hold, and there the Death Worlder stood before his army, his voice rising across the plain, saying, "Within these walls are not enemies, but our brothers and sisters. Chained their pain feeds the war, end it here. Free them, and you end the fire forever." The soldiers roared not with fear but with fury, and they surged forward, storming the towers, while the Death Worlder led the charge, his blade cutting through chains, his hands tearing down wires, sparks flying as prisoners gasped awake. The battle raged long into the night, screams and fire blending with the cries of freedom. Machines fell one by one, towers collapsing as more prisoners awoke, and though the enemy fought hard, they could not withstand the fury of those who no longer feared, for every soldier now knew the truth, and truth gave them strength beyond measure. When dawn broke, smoke covered the sky, but the towers were ruins, the prisoners free, and the enemy scattered. The Death Worlder stood among the wreckage, his body bloodied but his eyes bright, and he looked at the freed humans among the prisoners, their faces weak but alive, and he whispered, "You are safe now. You are home again." And in that moment he knew his mission was not only victory, but a warning to Earth itself, that the claws of lies had reached them already and must be cut away before they sank deeper. As the sun rose, the army gathered around him, silent, waiting for his words, and he spoke simply, "The war is not over, but the fire has turned. We are no longer pawns of liars. We are no longer cattle for slaughter. We are fury itself, and from this day no council, no empire, no enemy will ever again decide our fate." The soldiers roared with voices that shook the air, and in that roar the galaxy began to change for the first time in ages. Far away in hidden chambers, the remaining council leaders heard the news and trembled, because the one weapon they had always trusted, fear, had turned against them, and in its place walked humans who brought fury, not only in battle but in truth, and the cloaked figure standing in the shadows smiled faintly, saying, "The storm has come and nothing will stand against it now." The Death Worlder looked toward the stars, already planning the next march, because he knew this was only the beginning. The truth was free, but the galaxy was still bound in chains, and until every chain was broken, his path would not end. He whispered to himself and to those who listened,